Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay, so this episode is fascinating in that we actually see the full fight with White Album proper, and this episode is also interesting in that we learn a little bit more about Mista's backstory and how he developed his resolve as a member of a gang member, basically. And this episode just kind of further cements that White Album is is probably my favorite because it is a very cool stand, and it is kind of interesting in that it sort of has a weakness while also not. I'll get into that, but the episode then opens up with Giorno having successfully driven But in case the episode then opens up with Giorno having successfully driven into the canal, and he also manages to fight off Ghiaccio, but it's kind of a losing battle since Giorno's hands are now frozen and have since fallen off. So he now no longer. So yeah, his hands just kind of get really messed up. But he merely declares that Mista should go and get the disc that they need. While Giorno actually winds up holding Ghiaccio off and tells him that if he swims fast enough, he should be able to outrun Ghiaccio's ice. And Mista is a little reluctant to move on in without Giorno and going to get the disc without him, but upon seeing Giorno's resolve, he concludes that while he does admire Giorno's resolve, he concludes that he's not going to leave him behind, and they're going to find a way to defeat Ghiaccio together. At which point Ghiaccio kind of recovers from the beating he received from Giorno, when Mista tries to escape and tries to get off the car and into the canal, Ghiaccio just kind of demonstrates how dangerous his ability kind of is, because as they explain in the episode, and as Giorno even outright admits, driving into a canal full of easily freezable water against the guy who can freeze things was kind of a mistake. And sure enough, he winds up cornering them and prevents them from actually escaping. And also in the process, Mista actually winds up losing the palm of his already messed up hand. So yeah, you lose it. Yeah, this is the same hand that he lost a pinky finger on. The palm of that hand is now completely messed up, and he's barely able to use it at this point. But he merely tells Mista that it doesn't really matter how fast he thinks he can outrun them, since obviously his ice will be able to catch up to him regardless, since they're in a body of water. At which point, Mista actually winds up coming up with a brilliant idea and tells Giorno to actually grow something quickly before he dies. And sure enough, Giorno does it, pointing out that using the hood of the car to actually grow some stuff. And he tries to grow vines to actually reach to the shore, but Ghiaccio sees right through that and completely freezes the vines before they can even grow. And Giorno explains that it obviously is no use, since obviously the only thing that can grow in this kind of temperature is little grass from a tundra wasteland. Basically a small plant that is useless in actually getting them to the shore. But Mista concludes that this is exactly what he needs and starts plunking up multiple handfuls of it. And eventually Ghiaccio does reach with his ice, but by that point, it's too late, and it's revealed what Mista was actually after, which is that he actually used the fact that Ghiaccio actually is able to freeze things to make a snowboard out of the ice and just kind of slide his way to the edge of the canal so he can actually get out. And Ghiaccio quickly figures this out as well, and quickly realizing that he just helped Mista, eventually realizes that he can actually work with that, and proceeds to unthaw his ice so that Mista actually just falls into the canal, because now there's nothing holding his snowboard together, so he just falls in. At which point Ghiaccio, since Mista is out of his range, proceeds to swim after him with a breaststroke, and declares that his stand is invincible, since as he points out, ice is the most perfect ability there is, because it can easily freeze things and nothing is able to move in a sub-zero temperature, so it makes it very useful for a variety of different situations. At which point he tries to close in, and by this point Giorno has actually successfully has since thawed out and is able to actually get out of the car. And he actually winds up climbing to the roof and tells Mista to start collecting up the grass that is now scattered everywhere as Ghiaccio actually closes the distance between them and starts freezing Mista. And Mista does eventually figure out what Giorno is talking about, and it is indeed revealed that the grass that Mista used in his snowboard was very much part of the car. As established, Giorno can't make anything new. He can just makes life out of whatever's nearby. So sure enough, since he made vines and other things out of car parts, Mista eventually figures out that he can use the quote unquote grass to potentially punch a hole in Ghiaccio's White Album, and it works. He winds up finding a rivet and shoots it directly into Ghiaccio, and declaring that since it's car parts, that since he can use the car parts to punch holes in him, then proceeds to use his Sex Pistols to just kind of kick the rivet further and further in, so that it'll actually incapacitate him. And it doesn't kill him, but it does put Ghiaccio out of commission for a bit. And Giorno declares that Mista should have long enough to actually go and retrieve the disc that they need, and basically just tells them to go retrieve the thing, pointing out that when Ghiaccio gets back up, they'll be able to take him out. But and Mista is initially very on board with the plan, pointing out that he could easily just go to the lion statue, which he's quickly figured out is where the disc is likely hiding, and eventually concludes that he could very much just go into town and go and try and hide the disc with himself. But he points out that would actually cause more problems in the long term, since Ghiaccio would eventually come after Trish and Bruno and the others, and he doesn't want that. So he has to try and figure out. So he decides to actually go about it a different way and proceeds to leap back into the canal. And sure enough, he does have a bit of a reason for that, because as he points out, the fact that Ghiaccio has a quote-unquote invincible stand is complete bullshit, and or at least he's pretty convinced it's bullshit, and decides to try and figure out how Ghiaccio is actually breathing, pointing out that if it was indeed a perfectly invincible stand, he shouldn't be able to breathe. It should completely seal him up and completely seal himself in ice. But no, the fact that he can breathe despite that makes him think that there's something going on with White Album that's enabling Ghiaccio to breathe. And sure enough, after jumping into the canal, after Ghiaccio's somewhat immobile but still very much alive body, he does eventually figure out what it is. As it turns out, White Album does indeed have one weakness, and that is the fact that it has a breathing hole in the back of its skull that Ghiaccio is using to breathe through. So that's literally its only weakness. Literally, it just has a hole in the back of its head that Ghiaccio is able to use to actually breathe. And sure enough, when Mista actually leaps in, he eventually figures out what the breathing hole is, pointing that there's air coming out of it, and he then declares that he now needs to figure out a way to actually fire a bullet into White Album, so that he can actually defeat Ghiaccio by knocking a bullet through his one breathing hole. And they don't have much time to do it, because Ghiaccio has since regained consciousness and is now glaring daggers at Bruno, or is now glaring daggers at. But in any case, they have no time to do it, because Ghiaccio is now glaring daggers at Mista, and is prepared to actually finish it up and return to the surface. And sure enough, they can't. And sure enough, they don't have. Sex Pistols tells him that they don't actually have a clear shot to his breathing hole anymore, because he's now looking up and trying to resurface. But Mista actually just tells them that it's all part of the plan, and to keep the positions that he's going to give them. And with that, he then proceeds to surface himself, while Mista is while Ghiaccio is about to get ready to freeze Mista again, Mista actually figures out how to actually wind up distracting Ghiaccio so he can fire a bullet into his neck hole. And sure enough, he then proceeds to shoot several fish underwater, which causes them to die, and obviously while Ghiaccio's attention is distracted by the fish surfacing, Mista then takes this opportunity to fire a bullet into the back of his skull, using the bullet he used earlier and just kind of ricocheting it into the back of the Ghiaccio's skull so that he'll die. But it doesn't wind up working, and eventually they start hearing a weird noise. And as it turns out, Ghiaccio quickly figured out that they were going for his neck hole, since obviously that's the only weakness his White Album has. So of course he knows about it. But he then declares that while he does admire Mista's determination to defeat him, he points out that that's actually not going to work, and then proceeds to reveal that he actually does have an ability that will enable him to actually defeat Mista, and tells him that sure enough, everything can be frozen, even air. And then asks Mista if he can actually see the frozen air around him, and sure enough, Giorno actually eventually figures out what's going on, and does eventually realize that the noise they've been hearing is actually the sound of a ricocheting bullet, and sure enough, Ghiaccio unveils his new ability, White Album Gently Weeps, which winds up ricocheting the bullet right back into Mista. And as we find out, Ghiaccio, it's Ghiaccio's most powerful ability, but he can't really use it consecutively, or at least he can't really use it for prolonged periods, and only really uses it to end fights, since it does wind up sapping a lot of his stamina to use. So for that reason, he can't really use it all that much. But in any cases, at this point, where Mista, despite having a bullet in his shoulder now, then proceeds to try and climb back to the side of the canal and tries to climb out, and declares that this is all points out that this is all his fault, and that he needs to find a way to actually defeat White Album and take responsibility for what happened. Pointing out that he should have gone to the statue and gotten the disc when he had the chance, but in any case, since he's been incapacitated by the fact that he has a bullet in his shoulder, obviously Ghiaccio takes full advantage of the fact that that Mista isn't able to move very well to get to the statue first, and since it's right next to the canal, it's very easy to find. But he then starts looking around for it, and points out that he noticed how determined Mista is to actually get the spot before him. So he points out that while he doesn't readily see it, he declares that it must be in the immediate area, and sure enough, he's right. And then he busts open the statue and finds it, and sure enough has declared his victory, since now that he has the disc, he's one step closer to figuring out what the boss's ability is. And obviously now all he really needs to do is to find Trish and kill the two of them so that they can't actually report back what's going on. But in case Mista then proceeds to get up and gets ready to fire another bullet, but Giorno has since realized that Mista is actually taking the blame for what happened, and points out that he doesn't really feel like that's actually the best way to go. He very much points out that Mista shouldn't be taking full responsibility for what's going on, and that it's not going to be regret that's going to get them through, but resolve. And sure enough, he then demonstrates his resolve by breaking his arm open and which he has since patched together. I should mention, he has since patched it back together possibly using car parts, since that was the most readily available thing he had. But yeah, he proceeds to after patching himself back together, he busts his arm open and sends blood spurting everywhere, and into the battle with between Mista and Ghiaccio. And it's at this point where we get more of Mista's backstory, where we then revisit the incident where he actually shot 4 people, and then we find out the reason why he doesn't feel that he thinks 4 is bad luck, because well, we've already established that he killed 4 people, including the person he was trying to save, but well, that is not the only reason why he thinks it's bad luck. As it turns out, and as it's heavily established in the original scene, Mista killed 3 of those 4 people in self-defense, but the courts didn't see it that way and sentenced them to 30 years in jail. So yeah, this at this point where he was in jail and was beginning to question his resolve and his happy-go-lucky youth, and wonders if it'll all be for nothing and if he's going to actually die in jail. But as it turns out, no, because like maybe a day or two after he actually got sentenced, he's actually been released by Bruno, who shows up having revealed that he pulled some strings to get Mista out of jail, and actually declares that as far as he's concerned, it wasn't self-defense because he actually watched all the security footage that was used to incriminate Mista, and after pointing out that it was all in self-defense, and points out that Mista is a good guy, he decides to let him out, pointing out that he wouldn't last a year tops in jail, and proceeds to bring him back to the restaurant where he and his gang hang out, and proceeds to kind of just show him around, and just and orders him some food while they talk over some things, and upon seeing that Bruno is equally suspicious of the number 4, declares that that he and Bruno are going to get along just fine, and at which point Bruno declares that Mista is a bit of an odd one, and then the rest of the group show up, and Mista kind of quickly bonds with them, and what we find out is that, according to the narrator, is that Mista eventually figured out that everybody has predetermined lives, and that they live their whole life according to destiny, which is an established thing in JoJo's, but he finds out that everybody has a predetermined life that they're determined to live, and that ultimately his predetermined life was to join Bruno, Team Bucciarati, and become their gunman. So yeah, with that, he then kind of accepts his fate, and it's at this point where we come back to the present day, and Giorno then proceeds to spout out about how a newfound resolve is going to be the light that carries him through the darkness, and what we find out is that he means that quite literally, and Mista quickly figures out what Giorno's talking about, because Giorno splattered blood everywhere, Mista can now see where White Album Gently Weeps is, and can now figure out a charted path through Gently Weeps to get to the breathing hole on the back of White Album's neck. So with that, he then proceeds to fire a full round of bullets navigating through the Gently Weeps' minefield of frozen ice, and into a light post, which then proceeds to land directly into White Album's neck hole, which should have worked except for one thing, as Ghiaccio points out, because of the way Gently Album works, and because he can actually freeze his ice, and because he can actually freeze air, he can actually use the ability to store ice inside of his suit, and then thaw it out. And since it's insulated, it will actually thaw out on its own. But he then points out that because of that, he can actually breathe without a neck hole. So White Album effectively has no weakness, basically, is what I'm explaining. Despite the fact that it does have a very obvious weakness in the form of its neck hole, in the form of its one breathing hole, Ghiaccio can apparently just close it up whenever he wants and make himself completely invincible, at the cost of having to recycle some of the air in his suit. So yeah, as long as he replenishes the suit that we're using Gently Weeps, he's basically invincible and can't be killed that way. So yeah, but in any case, with that, he then declares that now that he's actually used the ability, that now Mista will actually have to suffer despair, because he's closed up his neck hole, he can now fire all the bullets back at Mista and redirect them back at Mista. And sure enough, Mista takes all of those bullets, but he then declares that he actually wasn't going for the neck hole at all. As it turns out, he was trying to bait Ghiaccio into redirecting his bullets into him on purpose, and declares that all he was really trying to do was splurt some of his own blood at Ghiaccio. And sure enough, White Album's visor is then completely covered in blood, which because of White Album's ability to freeze things, means that now there's a solid sheet of ice that Ghiaccio can't see through on his visor that he's supposed to be able to see through. And sure enough, Mista then proceeds to declare that this is his actual test of resolve, and that it was ultimately resolved to take his own bullets and make it so that Ghiaccio can't see where he is. And with that, then proceeds to actually fire several more bullets at Ghiaccio, and pushes him into the light post that he shot earlier, and eventually Sex Pistols do eventually figure out what Mista is actually doing, and eventually realize that that now, because he shot the light post, there's a jagged spike sticking in the back that just so happens to be the exact place where it needs to be to stab Ghiaccio in the back of the neck. And sure enough, after being shot a couple of times, Ghiaccio winds up stumbling into it and winds up impaling himself, but still very much alive despite that. He then declares that Mista isn't going to kill him and he isn't going to die this way, and the two then proceed to get into a bit of a fight where Ghiaccio, which winds up being just a test of resolve between the two of them, where Ghiaccio is determined not to die, and not to get impaled by the spike, while and continues firing back against Mista, while Mista in turn keeps firing bullets at him and taking them himself in the process of just kind of seeing who can last longer, and it's basically the deadliest game of chicken. Basically, whichever one caves first is the one that's going to die. So yeah, it's a very deadly game. It's a very deadly game of chicken that they're playing here. But eventually, Mista does wind up successfully getting Ghiaccio's the spike impaled in the back of Ghiaccio's neck, and he winds up seemingly finishing him off, with Ghiaccio being on his very last legs, but and Mista also being on his very last legs, but Mista proceeds to declare his victory, pointing out that he can still fight while Ghiaccio cannot, but Ghiaccio revealed that he actually did have seemingly had the stronger resolve, because as he reveals, he actually wound up freezing the blood that spurred from his neck and supporting himself that way. So now he's unable to actually be impaled by Mista's spike, and Mista in turn takes one last bullet to the head, which seemingly kills him at first, and Ghiaccio then proceeds to declare that he's won, only for the bullet to suddenly turn into a piece of Mista, and what we find out is that while Mista ultimately failed in killing Ghiaccio, he winds up distracting Ghiaccio long enough that Giorno could actually return to the side of the canal and proceed. And after healing up Mista so he didn't take the fatal bullet to the head, then declares that he admires Mista's resolve, and declares that he has, as he puts it, has a resolve that's brighter than the shining sun. Then he proceeds to finish up Ghiaccio, who is now more or less incapacitated and is unable to actually fight back, despite the fact that because he has a spike in the back of his head. And sure enough, Bruno then proceeds to release a flurry of kicks with gold experience, which finally finishes him off and causes his stand to deactivate. So yeah, he finally finishes off Ghiaccio, and Ghiaccio dies because he now has a spike through his neck. But in case with that, he then proceeds to take the disc from Ghiaccio and declares that now they have what they need, and Mista is just stares at Giorno with a bit of admiration, pointing out that even though he's a newbie and they don't really know what he's capable of yet, he fights very much like a capo. He's very protective of his friends, and Mista declares that even though he doesn't really understand what Giorno's deal is, he does declare that he has a very strong sense of following him to the ends of the earth and fighting for him, and has a sense of camaraderie that he doesn't really feel, that he feels more so with Giorno, instead of Bruno, even though Bruno is very much his capo. So and then proceeds to wonder what his deal is, but decides that he's kind of too delirious from the fact that he got shot so many times and is losing a lot of blood to really think about it all that much. At which point Giorno comes over to him and tells him that he fought well, and now they've gotten the disc. But and Mista is happy as well, but then tells Giorno to actually just hurry up and patch him up since he's about to die. And at which point Giorno then proceeds to explain how his ability actually works, which is that he actually isn't healing him. He's just replacing the parts of the body that were damaged with the things that are lodged inside of him. So, case in point, he then points out that he's going to use the bullets to kind of repair the organ damage that was the fatal damages that were done to Mista, and that it's ultimately going to hurt like hell because he still has a bullet in his body. But in case he then starts patching Mista up, and sure enough, Mista is in incredible pain because of what Giorno's doing. Obviously, Giorno told him that he was going to hurt, and Mista quickly realizes he was right. But he then proceeds to, at which point Giorno then continues to patch him up, but points out that he still has 18 holes in that in him, and that he may need to take his clothes off to get to the rest. So by the time Narancia has led the rest of the group to where where Mista and Giorno are, using his Aerosmith, obviously using his Aerosmith to locate them. And sure enough, Bruno gives him a very cautious order to keep his eyes peeled and see if there's any sort of enemies nearby. Since obviously there's still two left. According to them, they don't know if Ghiaccio has actually been finished off yet, so they need to keep an eye on it. But sure enough, Narancia finds him. But by the time he finds him, Giorno is trying to take Mista's clothes off to get to the rest of the bullet holes, and Narancia just kind of pretends he has something in his eye so he doesn't have to look at it, and even announces it out loud so that Bruno thinks nothing is wrong. Yeah, that's all this episode. But in any case, this episode then has one final after credits scene where as it turns out, the tech guys that Risotto attacked earlier managed to get a message out to the boss, who has since figured out that what Risotto is doing, and points out that he actually finds the whole situation inconsequential, pointing out that obviously he's really hoping that the group will kill Bruno's group will ultimately kill him and finish him off for him, but then declares that it likely isn't going to matter all that much, and then proceeds to use his stand. We don't actually see what his stand is, but it's very clear that it's something time-based, because the way they demonstrate this is that there's a vase of flowers on a table in his room, and after using his ability, his statue, the vase is now completely broken and is now when it wasn't earlier. So yeah, it seems to be something time-based, and also he takes off his hoodie, which winds up falling to the floor, but he's completely gone. But yeah, there seems to be something time-based regarding the boss's stand, and I'm interested to see what that is, since obviously time is a very powerful ability in JoJo's. Obviously the past two antagonists have had it. So Dio had it. Had the ability to stop time, and obviously Yoshikage Kira gained the ability to rewind time, and it resets itself every time somebody dies to it. So yeah, very much so a very dangerous ability if the boss does indeed have that, because yeah, time rewinding powers are very powerful ability in JoJo's, because obviously there's not many defenses you can have against it unless you have the ability to freeze time yourself like Jotaro did. So yeah, I am interested to see how that ability is going to work. But more to the point, I'm very interested to see how White Album is going to work as well. How White Album worked as well, because obviously White Album is well and away my favorite stand in the series so far. But yeah, liked how White Album worked. The way it worked was that it could freeze everything, could create a suit of armor that was mostly invincible, say for a breathing hole in the back of his neck, and even then, it technically has no weakness, since Ghiaccio could just freeze up the hole and put some ice inside himself to create an air pocket, which he wind up using in the fight to defend himself against Mista. So yeah, I just liked how White Album worked, and I'm a little sad it's gone now, because it was a very pardon the pun, it was a very cool stand, and I liked it. But in any case, that is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. In any case, thank you guys so much for watching. If you also want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!